How do you reconcile then some of the limitations of tattooing? First of all, the medium. Secondly, the commission slash commercial aspect of them, and trying to create a piece that the person's going to be happy with and please them. How do you reconcile some of that?
Well, I guess in the first part of the question, where it comes to what was the first part you said, technically, or
like medium?
Medium,
the actual.
I mean, there's definitely, I find that because I've allowed myself to explore so much in painting, I don't feel so much hindered by the limitations in tattooing, because I know that I can express beyond those limitations in another media, so it really helps. But sometimes there are I can't think of anything right offhand, but sometimes little things that I learn from painting I can bring back into tattooing. I have to adapt it,
Sure.
But some of that stuff can still work. When it comes to the whole part of like dealing with the customer, that's actually something that for me, I think largely generationally, and I think this maybe you have less of a problem with it, but I think you'll know what I'm talking about because you were coming from the same kind of zone there, that like, when I started tattooing, it was, the importance was being able to do everything. If people came in and wanted a portrait, you did a portrait. They want tribal, you did a tribal. They want traditional, you do that. Like, you do whatever the fuck people want and try and do it in the way they want it, and then there was much more of a of that kind of, like, people seemed, when people came in before, unless they just picked something off the wall, they had a lot clearer ideas of what they wanted sometimes. And now over the years, I get more and more customers, especially younger people, who honestly have no fucking clue what they want. And it's taken me a really long time to start to come to terms with that, because in the back of my head, I still have this like old school mentality of like, well, are they going to be happy with this? Like, I see other tattooers that people come in like, oh, I don't know what I want. Like, okay, we'll do this. And it works and it's great and the person's happy. And it's a totally valid way to do it. It's just been hard for me to wrap my mind around that. Whenever people invite me to just do what I want, I'm excited by the possibility, but at the same time, part of me is like, but is this going to connect with you? Is this really going to mean something to you? And it's taken me a while, but I'm learning to adapt to that change of style. I have a customer right now I'm doing a full sleeve on, and I seriously grilled this guy for days. I was sending him texts, calling him like, what are you into this? You into that? He gave me virtually nothing to work with, like virtually nothing. He's just telling me like my stuff. I was like, well, okay, so we just started working on stuff, and it's been really fun. But he's one of those few people that when they tell you do whatever you want, he actually means it, because we all know that do whatever you want really means, oh yeah, well, I didn't want, but not that.
I didn't want that. I was thinking more of something like this. You're like, oh, cool.
And you're like, yeah, just cut to the chase. Just tell me what you wanted in the first place. For sure, that's always a difficult thing.
It's funny. Freddie and I talked about that too.
Yeah.
About the difficulty in navigating a space where people are so free, or seemingly so free in their subject choice or lack of, that it leaves Freddie and I both in a space where we're like, but like, I mean, like, I don't want to force something on you that you're going to be like, it's okay. Like, I don't want to give you an it's okay tat.
No, I want to give you a tattoo.
I want to give you a tat that you're like super stoked on, like, because if you don't love it, it's not a good tattoo.
Yeah.
So like, how do we get there? And some people, it's strange. It's a little strange. I mean, and we also talked about the adventure aspect of tattooing, right? So like, coming to get something doesn't necessarily mean it has to be like, here are my parameters. You need to be perfect. It could be like, I don't know, I really wanted to get marked, and I wanted to get marked during this trip this week, and I really like the shop, so let's make a mark.
And to me, as getting tattooed, that little bit of chaos and unpredictability is part of the thrill.
Right.
Otherwise, you're just a human Xerox machine, which, that's not an invalid thing. That's there's people that want that, but it's not very fun, And I feel like, it definitely, it's been an awkward change for me, but I'm getting more adapted to it. I've found that, I think what I'm really going to put most focus on now is just doing a ton of wanna-dos and stuff, because people just like to pick from those. And if they see something, like in the old days, people used to talk shit, like, and now you're just picking shit off the wall. What the fuck? You're dumb.
That's so funny. We talked about
If you see something on the wall that fucking resonates with you, that is valid as all fuck. Wherever
100%.
you see it, wherever that image comes from.
Right.
If it hits that chord in you and you feel that little thing, then yeah, it's cool.
Right. That's what you should get.
Yeah. So I think that whole system is a good way of doing things, because then that the person is responding because they saw the design that's already there. They already know they like it for whatever reason that maybe they don't even understand or could explain themselves. They feel a certain connection with it.
Right. And they don't have to know.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
If it works for you, it works.
That's a good way to do it. Whatever. Or when I first started working with Henry, there were so many times. He gave me a lot of technical instruction, but there were so many times I'd be like, Henry, here's this situation. What do I do? How do I handle this? Like, tell me the trick. And he's like, whatever way gets the job done just right. And I was just like, oh, Henry, I would just get so frustrated. And I thought he was just fucking with me, but I realized later, I really valued that later, because I realized that what he was doing was he was giving me enough of the technical instruction I needed to do what I needed to do. But he didn't want to tell me how to do everything, because he wanted me to figure out some stuff on my own. That's one of the things that's great about tattooing is everybody does the same things in different ways.
Right.
There's certain things that are somewhat standardized, but like I have, one of the things I've been really grateful for in my career is I've worked at so many shops. I've worked with so many people, and I've never once in my entire career worked with anybody that I didn't learn something from. Even people whose tattoos I wasn't that into, even people that I thought were assholes, there's always something I've learned from them. Even if it's just some weird little trick, there's always something because of that difference, that wide palette of approaches. It's that's one of the wonderful things about tattooing, and I like always trying to learn new stuff. That's one of the reasons I've been really enjoying working here, is we've got everybody who works here, for one, they're all just 10 times younger than me. So it's, new blood to me. I can kind of vampirically suck a bit of their life force, and they've got enough they don't even notice it's gone. But, it's nice to be working around people who have, fresh ways of looking things that I'm not familiar with, and just, always looking for new ideas, new blood, whether it's technical or design. When I first started working for Ed Hardy, one of the things that really, really won my respect early on, of course, I walked in there with nothing but respect for him, but, as I was there, I and everybody else there, I think I had about 4 years experience when I started there. And maybe some of the other guys had maybe 5 or 6, but we were all young in the business,
Right.
And Ed would come in, and if he saw any of us doing something that he didn't understand, that he wasn't familiar with, he would grill us. He was like, what are you doing there? Why are you doing that? How are you doing that? And I realized that it's because he never wanted to stop learning. He always wanted, if there's anybody at that point could have just rested on their laurels, never learned another thing, and still done fine, it was Ed. But he wasn't, for himself as a person, he wasn't happy with that. He felt the need to constantly be learning new stuff, pushing himself further. And he's been, in his later career, he was very open about younger tattooers that were major influences on his work, which that really, because to me, I feel like the minute, whatever you do in your life, even if you don't do anything, as long as you keep learning, your brain stays healthy. The minute you stop learning, you turn into a fucking zombie. And being a zombie is one of the last things I would ever want in my life. I want to keep my mind fresh. I want to keep learning. I want to keep trying new things. There's been times in my career where I feel like I've fallen into ruts a little bit. It happens to all of us. We're fucking human. Where I feel like, the tattoos I was doing were good, but there would be long stretches where I was just doing the Chris Conn thing, And, in recent years, I've felt like, when I was in Europe and then coming back from Europe and working here, I felt so much of an infusion of fresh blood and fresh ideas, fresh approaches to things. And it's made me really excited again, about work. It's been really nice to be like pushing myself again like I used to in the beginning. I don't ever want to rest on my laurels.
That's so cool.
It's just when I was a young tattooer and I used to see older guys that had reached this point where you could tell like they'd figured out their thing, they knew how to do it, and they had just kind of settled there.
But a lot of people, that's what they want. They seek exactly that.
And I'm not even saying that's bad.
Right.
If that's what you want, 3 cheers, that's great. If that's what you're comfortable with. But just for me, I was just like, I never want to be that dude. Right.
Couldn't work for me either.
I was at a dinner not too long ago with a bunch of tattooers that were all about my age, my generation, and oh man, it was the worst dinner. All the way through it, like all these guys, all they do is sit around. Oh, the tattooers these days, these kids, they're ruining everything. This is not real tattooing. And I was just like, how's it not real tattooing? They're leaving a mark. It's a fucking tattoo. It's real, I'm like, and I realized that at that point I was like, I'd rather be out having dinner with the kids who are fucking everything up right now than hanging out with you guys who do nothing but sit around and talk about the old days and how great it was and how everything's shit now. I'm like, you can't live like that, living in nostalgia and regret. It's like, you gotta move with things. You don't have to do what everyone else is doing, but as times change and the world evolves around you, if you don't evolve with it, you're not learning and you're missing out, It's like, there's a lot of stuff going on in newer tattooing now that I don't entirely back. There's plenty of things. But that was the case back in the 90s too. That's always been the case, Sure. And I really feel like right now is a very exciting time in tattooing for me because, there's so many things have changed. The diversity of tattooers has changed hugely, and that's been a really nice thing. Also that there's just so many more, I see so many more people now trying new crazy things that are very specific, these niche market kind of tattooers. And, sometimes there's things about that I think, well, as long as your niche keeps evolving, that works, but otherwise you're going to be a one-trick pony. But at the same time, there's something to be said for picking a certain thing and really isolating on that and just perfecting it, I mean, I think there's good aspects to both, But, I get really excited about the state of tattooing right now, more so than I have been in years.
That's awesome. What I was going to touch on earlier is that when you were talking about being inspired, I think that's I look at it as pretty magical, right? Because I think in a lot of ways we can seek to be inspired, but how do we really choose to be inspired, right?
You can't choose to be inspired any more than you can choose to fall in love. It just happens or it doesn't.
Right. So that is pretty awesome to be open to it and have it come, because you can't choose when it happens, right? Yeah. It just happens. So
that's why you just have to be open.
Is really great. It's pretty magical.
So you just have to stay open. Just keep your mind open and fresh, and and if you do that, things will come. The problem comes when you start thinking in repetitive, limited ways, dogmatically thinking about everything, adhering too much to too many rules, most of which are no longer any valid anyways. Right.
Or ones that prop you up and isolate you in some space.
Yeah. Right. You got to constantly be bringing in new stuff. I mean, like even just for design, like something that I see a lot in a lot of tattooers. Okay, customer X comes in and I want, let's say, I want a hyena, right? Now, a lot of tattooers I'll watch, they deal with that by what they'll do is they'll go on their phone, and I have nothing against digital media as a reference is amazing. If you throw books out, then you've really ruined it. But the two together are great. But what they'll do is they'll look up hyena tattoo.
Oof.
You know what I mean? And then they're looking at how other people tattooed
their idea, representation of what.
And I can understand sometimes if you run into a technical thing and you want to see how somebody else handled this one technical difficulty, okay.
Right.
But what happens when you start doing that, when you spend too much time looking at other people's work, whether you want to or not, it starts soaking in, and your design becomes incestuous. It becomes, you're dipping back into a pool over and over again. There's no room for fresh ideas. Like I always try and, when I talk to younger tattooers, if they ask me advice and stuff, one of my biggest pieces of advice is don't spend so much time looking at tattoo stuff. Like, look at it, you want to see what's going on. But when you want inspiration, when you're looking for design, if you just want to spend some fun time filling your head with ideas that will later manifest, just research stuff. There's 15 million kinds of art out there that could all have amazing possibilities in tattooing that nobody ever really looks at or uses, I mean, right. People do occasionally spread out a little bit here and there, but overall, like, there's a very strong tendency in the tattoo community to have a very kind of incestuous vocabulary where everybody's referencing the same things. And this is why you look at certain tattoos and you're like, well, that's pretty 2003 or that's pretty fucking 1992 or whatever,
Sure.
Because things just start to look like what everybody else is doing at that time. And, a certain amount of that is okay. It's the zeitgeist of the time. It's we're all feeling, the vibe and the aesthetic of the time, and that affects us all. But the more that you look outside of tattooing, the more you look at things that have nothing to do with tattooing, the more that enriches your tattoo vocabulary. It's like a smoothie. You have to fill your brain with all the ingredients, If all you put in there is the same ingredients every day, it's going to be a boring fucking smoothie. But if you put in new stuff, the more ingredients you put in, the more variety you have, and the more depth you can put into things, And
I think also then you create a space where you're able to start to develop your own vocabulary and language and how to execute and how to tell your story about what you think a hyena tattoo looks like, instead of like, well, I saw this other hyena tattoo, so I'm going to make one that works, or I don't know exactly how, but instead of going like, I'm going to draw that 8 times to figure it out.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to get to a space where I'm like, okay, now I feel good about this.
Yeah.
Like I understanding it more, and like I don't want to do it like that at all. I want to do it like this.
Yeah.
Right.
And to play with it is important, because
so
that's
important.
where we learn the most is in playing, and that's, playing is research mixed with love, and I think that that's absolutely crucial. It's like, but something you said earlier when you were talking about using reference and how anyone looking at it would never connect directly the reference to what you ended up doing. I feel very much the same way about that. Like, there's so many things, I collect so many images, even in a day. I spend a lot of time on Tumblr and Pinterest and doing research on Google, looking at books, like everything, just constantly devouring images, just stuffing my head with however many images that I can that I like. And, I used to question myself when I'd see a certain image. I'd be like, oh, how could I use that in tattooing? Will that work? I don't do that anymore. If an image attracts me, I don't even ask myself why or what is it about it. Not right off the bat. I just collect it. And then later, when I'm looking, I'll look at it and I'll be like, so why does this image affect me,
Right.
And so 9 times out of 10, when I do sometimes use a reference to draw from. Of course, there are things where it's just like, you've got to use some reference. But mostly it's I'll look at an image that gives me a concept or an idea that triggers something else.
Right, it's a springboard.
It's a springboard, and then that your mind starts doing somersaults once it jumps off that springboard, and what you end up with is totally different from what originally inspired it, you know, and that's such a fun process.
Yeah.
You know, that's
Right.
the best. But, you know, yeah, intuition is a really crucial part of that to me. I think it's important for me at this point, and I, you know, so many different ways of tattooing, but for me, with what I want to do now, I try way less to think too much in a surface mental way about things, and try and let my intuition guide me more than my crazy chaotic thoughts, you know.
That's very cool.
I feel like intuition rarely leads me wrong. My brain always leads me wrong. And that's just in life in general, you know.
Like listening to your vagus nerve.
Yes, the vagus nerve. one of the best nerves in the body.
It reminds me a little bit, you know, what you're talking about Ed and him always being hungry for new things. I remember being at the shop one time and we were listening to the Misfits. And he's like, "Hey, who is this?" And we're like, "It's the Misfits." And he's like, "This is really fucking good. How come nobody told me about this earlier?"
Yeah.
Like, we were like, wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow,
was
that's so
always like
crazy.
that. He did. I got the only time I ever got chewed out at Tattoo City. I played Christian Death Only Theater of Pain, which, you know, it's pretty fucking gothy. Not everybody's that into it, but, you know, the other dudes at the shop were fine with it. But Ed was there working that day. Oh my, he did not like Christian Death. I got a hell of a tongue lashing that day. That was...
I'm lucky. I never got one from him.
Yeah.
I heard him give some.
Oh, and when he does...
It's like the sharpest...
It's so concise.
It's the sharpest fucking blade
It's
made.
like one or two short sentences perfectly designed to reduce you to your smallest fucking level.